Good morning. So I want to talk a little bit about the schedule. The day you want to have your bread ready is the best day to bake your bread. Like bake it in the morning and have it ready. If you need to have it ready in the morning, then you need to bake it the night before. Whatever day you decide to bake your bread, you're going to mix the dough for the bread the night before. And the day before that, you're going to make the leaven. And the day before that, you're going to feed your starter. So it's feed, make leaven. Next day, make the dough. Next day, bake the bread, potentially gift the bread, eat the bread, whatever you want to do. So that's what we call the baking schedule. This is the day after I made the leaven. So I have on my stove, I have a proofing setting that's awesome because it keeps the dough while it's rising at a consistent temperature that's safe for the yeast, but it's also an excellent place to put the leaven. So I have that in there now. And my leaven is doubled in size. It's got nice little bubbles in there, okay? It's already lost its dome. So the dome is as the yeast rises and pushes it up, it makes a little dome on top. It's sort of dropped a little bit because I've been handling it, but this is the starter that we fed yesterday. And so you see it's doubled in size as well. And so it's real happy. I'll feed it again today. But we're gonna go ahead and use the leaven along with 2 flours, some water to make the dough. And then we're gonna add salt and just let it rise. And so today is dough making day. So as I said before, I'm using the table loaf recipe. I usually quadruple this recipe because it's the same amount of work to do 4 loaves as it is to do 1. But for the sake of clarity, let's just do 1 loaf today. So we start off with 60 grams of leaven. This is our leaven from last night. I'm gonna give it a good mix, and I'm just gonna plunk it into my ready to go bowl. I use the tare function on there to make sure that I just get what I need. That's like 30% more than I need. So I'm shooting for 60 grams here. And on the table loaf recipe, there's a great video where Sarah Owens runs through how to do all this. She does a really good job. So if I am not making sense or I'm not complete enough, go ahead and hit her video to see exactly how she likes to do it. So there's my 60 grams of leaven. And now I'm gonna add 300 grams of water. This is room temperature water. And I'm just gonna bump it up to 300 grams. And then I'm gonna stir it in just to break up the leaven, just to get it really well distributed. This is the only time I'm really gonna use this spatula. And then I'm gonna hit the tare button again. And now we're gonna go with 310 grams of bread flour. You can always adjust because the first time you make this recipe, I'm gonna go 80 grams of whole wheat flour now. The first time you make this recipe, you're gonna be learning all of the different components that go into it. And part of that is learning your flour. That's why I recommend you find one source of flour and use it while you're learning this process, because really it is about the process as much as it is about the ingredients. The key here is once you have a handle on how much water it takes, because maybe it'll take 5 grams more water or 25 grams more water. Maybe it'll take 25 grams more flour. But I'll try to show you some of the things that I look for as I'm going through and doing this. There's my 80 grams of whole wheat flour. And now I'm gonna mix it. So just use your bare hand, it's easier. We're just gonna mix it in. And it's strange to be doing so little, but that's okay. And as this comes together, it's real shaggy. It's real rough. And that's okay, because it will smooth out as you go along. Now, depending on the humidity of the day and the humidity in your kitchen, we have air conditioning here. It tends to dry the house out a bit more than if you're in a non-air conditioned house. That's going to change the chemistry. But that's the thing that's so cool about learning to do sourdough, is you learn all of the different levers that you can twist to make great bread. So I'm going to let this come together. This is why I like this round bowl scraper. I'm going to let this come together, and it's a bit shaggy. You see how it's just kind of gluey and gummy, but that's okay. I'm feeling it for how much hydration it has. I'm not seeing any pieces of flour left behind, because I know that with this recipe, I know this proportion works. If you get this far and it's kind of wet or it's kind of dry, you can choose to add a little bit of water right now. But I urge you to don't do it. Let it come together like that, and I'll show you in 30 minutes the difference in the way that the bread absorbs the water, the way the flour picks up the water, and how it changes. You'll also notice that even though the recipe calls for salt, we haven't added it yet. Salt sort of retards some of the natural processes, so we want to let it sit for 35 to 45 minutes and just kind of ferment this way. Autolyze is the word for it, and it'll change character. Then we'll add the salt. So I'm going to put my, ooh, that was really close. I'm going to put my, you can put a tea towel over it. This is why I love these big shower caps. I'm putting that in my cool oven. Mine happens to be at proofing. You can leave it at room temperature if you want. You can do anything you want. When you start experimenting and you start learning, follow the recipe exactly the first time, and then start adjusting one thing at a time. Like maybe you don't like the flour. Use all the flour you have while you adjust other things. Start out, just follow the recipe straight through. We'll see how it goes. I'll see you back here in half an hour. All right, so we're gonna add 8 grams of sea salt. It's not very much, but it makes a huge difference both in the flavor and the chemical activity of the dough. Now, one of the things I learned accidentally, call that a happy accident, is you need to mix the dough more than you think when you add the salt, because the salt kind of makes this layer that separates half the dough from the other half of the dough. I learned this because I ran out of my good sea salt, and I ended up using pink Hawaiian salt, which is just fine. It worked out great. I mixed it like this, And after the first 30 minutes following the salt addition, I found out that there's pink all through and I hadn't mixed it well enough. So let me try and show you what I'm talking about. I'm gonna mix in the rest of the salt and I'm gonna start, you see how it doesn't adhere, okay? So it'll do that. That layer of salt is gonna keep the dough from combining. So what you really wanna do, I take my cutter and I cut through the dough to make sure that it's getting mixed in and that the salt is getting mixed in really evenly throughout the dough. So see how it's forming voids? We want to break those voids up. Okay, we want to make sure that those layers of salt are all incorporated into the dough. This is probably the most vigorous mixing I do the whole day, because for the rest of the day, we're going to use a really simple technique called stretch and fold. So I'm just pushing it down, pushing it down, pushing it down, then I'll turn it over and I'll make sure that I don't have any of those voids where there's a salt layer. And once I get it that far along, I'm still not going to adjust the water or the flour until 30 minutes from now. And I'll show you what to look for in 30 minutes. But now that I've got the salt all incorporated and it's a homogeneous mass, and you'll even notice it's starting to take on kind of a glutinous feel. Now I can put the bread back in the oven, back in my cool proofing oven, or just in a warm spot for 30 more minutes. See you in a sec. Okay, so it's been about 30 minutes. The thing I'm looking for after adding the salt for the first time is I'm looking for any little bead of water that might appear around the edges. If you have a little bit of moisture there, just add like a teaspoon or two of flour, because it just means it might be a little bit too wet. If it's too dry, you'll know that too. It takes a little bit of time to learn that, but this looks perfect to me. So I'm gonna use a stretch and fold technique. No more kneading or anything like that, because we wanna build air into it, but also build that gluten structure. So I'm just gonna scoop it with my hand. I'm gonna stretch it and fold it over on itself. Scoop it, stretch it, fold it over. Scoop it, stretch it, fold it over. Do this about 4, maybe 5 times, and you'll start to feel it kind of come together. Like that. That's all I'm gonna do. I'll take my bowl scraper, make sure any little shaggy bits get added back. My timer is set for 30 minutes. I'm gonna come back and do this again and again and again. Every 30 minutes. It's been an hour now, so we're gonna do it every 30 minutes for the next 3 hours. You'll see this double in size. It's really cool. Don't go after it with a dry hand. Just a little bit of water on your hand, not much. And then you can grab it. I'm feeling the dough. I'm feeling for that tension. First 2 turns, I don't feel much. But as I work my way around, I get a nice lot of tension out of that. So the gluten's developing really nicely. It's getting nice and puffy. So the sourdough is doing its job. And I'm just gonna let that go. So just every 30 minutes, that's all we're doing. So it's getting nice and bubbly. So I'm just stretching it, feeling the spring in it. You don't want to mash it down. You're just trying to stretch it. And this is a lot easier to do when you have more dough, and then fold it over. So it's just stretch and fold each time. All right, so it's been about 4 hours total time, and our dough is risen. It's nice and puffy. It's still very wet, which is fine. And what I'm gonna do, I have these granite-like countertops, and they're great for doing this. If you wanna do it on a marble stone, you can do that. If you wanna do it just on a plastic cutting board, you can do that. Just make sure you have room to work, and you'll see why when I say that, why I say that. So I'm gonna cut the dough out of the bowl so I don't damage that beautiful bubble structure. Also makes cleaning the bowl a lot easier later. So do that. And I'm gonna do an initial shaping, and then I'm gonna do final shaping after it rests for like half an hour. So the dough is super sticky. It's gonna stick to my hands. So you can use flour if you want, just don't use a lot. I'm gonna grab it, and you'll see that now that my hands are wet, I can move really quickly to shape the dough. And I'm just pulling and forming, and then I'm just gonna roll it over on itself. I'm trying to build tension, and then I'm just gonna leave them just like that, okay? We're gonna do a final shaping in a few minutes, about 15, 20 minutes or so. What I wanna see is I wanna see how tight he is right now. We're gonna cover him with a tea towel. We're gonna let him sit. He's gonna relax. And then we're gonna tighten him up one more time, and then we're gonna put him to rest in the banneton in the fridge overnight. Okay, see you in a minute. All right, so the final shaping. You wanna have the receptacles ready to go so you don't have to bounce back and forth between shaping the dough. So I use these linen covers on my bannetons. It makes it easier in the morning to get them ready to go. This is just 50-50 AP flour and rice flour. If you don't have rice flour, don't worry about it. Just use regular AP flour, doesn't matter. The nice thing about rice flour is it's super dry, and so the bread will always release, always. Okay, so he's relaxed a little bit. Now you have a couple options at this point. You could redo the fluff and fold that we just did, or you can do a pull shape. And so I'm gonna do both just to kind of show you how this goes. I'm gonna turn him back over. And one of the things Sarah does that I kind of like, she does this to get a round ball, is pull from the corners, pull from the top, and then pull these guys together. That makes a really nice ball shape, since we're throwing it into a ball-shaped banneton. And then just kind of tuck those guys together. Now, most people use way too much flour on the flour board. You just need about that much, okay? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tuck some of that flour underneath, and I'm gonna flip him over, and then I'm gonna use some of this flour around the outside just to remove the tackiness, but you don't wanna lose the dryness of the board. I'll try to do this towards the camera first. I'm pushing, you see how it drags and tightens it like skin. Okay, so I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna pull this way, tightens. If it hits that flour, it's just gonna scoot right across the countertop. I'm gonna pull like that. And it makes it just nice, and it should feel like a water balloon. So all I'm doing, and you can do this with your bare hands too, I'm just not as good at it with my bare hands, is I'm just pulling to get it nice and tight. You can move it around if you want. I'm just pulling to get it as tight as I can, because it builds this tension. you start to see little bubbles appear, that means you're doing it right. So we're just building tension into the ball, because what's gonna happen tomorrow is it's gonna come out cold out of the fridge. And when it comes out cold out of the fridge, we're gonna put it into a screaming hot cast iron pan, and all those yeast are gonna wake up and they're gonna get really hot and they're gonna create gas, and it's just gonna explode. That's why we're trying to build tension now, so that we're sort of priming the spring, and then tomorrow when we put it in the pan, it's just gonna explode. So I'm gonna do one last little shape here. Pulling, pulling, pulling. See how tight it gets? I'm gonna scoop them into my hand and I'm gonna drop them in the banneton like that. If at this point it starts to separate on you, you can twist them up. I'm not worried about that. This is one of my small shower caps, okay? And this guy just goes in the fridge. So he'll sit in here anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. 24 hours? I mean, people say that doing sourdough is stressful. It's not if you understand the levers and controls. He can sit in there for 24 hours if we want. Sorry, I just had lunch with sourdough. And you don't have to worry about it. So create your own schedule based on that feeding schedule, leaving schedule, making the dough like today, baking tomorrow. Tomorrow's Monday. I've got meetings in the morning, so I'll fire up the oven during one of those meetings, and then I have an hour to bake this guy, and that's all I need. So you can create your own schedule. It doesn't have to be stressful. It's not that hard. I've actually been in the wood shop today while I've been doing these videos. So just kind of make it your own. Every 30 minutes, 45, 35, 25, just make it your own. It's super easy. We'll see you in the morning. We'll bake some bread.